my question, and it applies to all religions, not just Christianity, but we're going to focus on Christianity because that's what I grew up with. Does anyone really believe this shit? I mean, like, seriously, does anyone really believe this shit? I just don't see how anyone could. It's too ridiculous.
Alright, TJ, I'll bite. Does anyone really believe in God? The short answer, yes. We do believe there is a God. We believe in the evidence that theism is true, there is life after death, that Jesus was resurrected, and that the Bible was reliable. And we believe these things because the evidence supports it, not because we want to. And that is why we make our case through debating evidence and research. TJ, or the amazing atheist, is, however, not alone in this line of thinking. I've encountered many atheists who have asked me similar questions. Do you really believe there is a God, or do you just want there to be a God? Did you just invent a delusion to make yourself feel comfortable? Well, I don't think it matters how many times we say it. I doubt that most atheists will take our word on it, that we really do believe there is a God, since many atheists already presuppose we have just invented delusions, instead of any of them actually listening to our arguments and reasons. They simply assume they just know better. So, I propose a point of agreement where atheists might listen, which is science. Why don't we see what science has to say about religious beliefs? Has science studied religious beliefs, and does it indicate it is unnatural or a delusion? Well, yes, and in fact studies have indicated the opposite. And there are several we can look at. First, the work of two researchers looked at the chemistry of the brain during religious experience, and came to the conclusion mystical experience is biologically, observably, and scientifically real. In their book, Why God Won't Go Away, they explain that religious thought and experience is far from a delusion, and were not the result of emotional mistakes or simple wishful thinking, but were associated instead with a series of observable neurological events, which, while unusual, are not outside the range of normal brain function. They report that their findings do not teach that one's sense of a spiritual reality is a delusion, but in fact quite the opposite. And just to be clear, let's point out that because religious experience happens in the brain, that doesn't mean it's a delusion. So their point can be seen in an analogy. Let's say you see a computer sitting in front of you right now. Now suppose there was a neuroscientist in the room with you that could specify your neurological pathways that are happening in your brain right now that create the belief that you see a computer sitting in front of you right now. Does that mean that the belief there is a computer in front of you is just created by your brain chemistry, and there's not really one outside of your brain that's sitting in front of you? Of course not. And just because one may have a religious experience, that doesn't mean it is only created by the brain. Their research suggests it may in fact be generated by another reality, since a religious experience doesn't happen in the brain the same way delusions happen, and they are quite compatible with normal brain function, in a similar way that visual perceptions are. Plus, several other studies have shown theistic beliefs are quite natural. Jesse Baring, the former director of the Institute of Cognition and Culture, has published studies on the issue, and stated the research shows religion is natural in the sense of being motivated by core, evolved psychological intuitions, and goes on later to say belief is a cognitive default, and that all else being equal, in any given cultural context, religious beliefs are driven into expression by a universal, evolved core set of psychological intuitions present in all normal human brains. So religious beliefs are intuitive in all humans and completely natural to accept as true, and this is backed by a wealth of research. Banerjee and Bloom concluded our cognitive biases make us prone and receptive to religious ideas. Justin Barrett has published several studies on the behavior and beliefs of children and concludes theistic and religious beliefs are intuitive from a very early age, challenging the indoctrination hypothesis. In a few studies he cites, Dr. Barrett demonstrates that young children naturally believe things were created as they are, and exist with purpose, instead of existing for no reason and lacking design. In his book he says, children are prone to believe in supernatural beings, such as spirits, ghosts, angels, devils, and gods, during the first 4 years of life, due to ordinary cognitive development in ordinary human environments. His research even included children who were raised in atheistic households, who were exposed to very little religion, and yet he still found the same results. But are not children just making up imaginary friends, which is all theism is? According to his research, no. In fact, despite the cultural myth, evidence suggests children can distinguish imagination from reality, and understand that there is an ontological difference between an imaginary friend and a real person, with only a little bit of temptation to think the imaginary friend is actually real. Yet children seem to include the existence of God in the realm of real. The existence of God is far more than just a delusion and a game of pretend, and is quite natural in our cognitive development. So since the evidence leads us to accepting theistic beliefs are natural and intuitive, the flip side of the coin would say the opposite about atheism. To the ironic surprise of many atheists, who claim religion is an unnatural delusion that must be eradicated, research actually shows it is atheism that is unnatural and almost impossible for the human mind to believe. This means the research would suggest that most atheists actually believe there is purpose and meaning in their life, and believe in a higher being even if they don't realize it or admit it. Barrett says, in a more recent study, self-described British and American atheists were asked a series of quasi-structured interview questions about their own major life events as part of an alleged study on autobiographical memory. Many of these individuals' answers revealed an implicit attribution of teleofunctional fatalistic purpose to these turning points in their lives. A typical example of an atheist reasoning in this manner is shown in a response given by a British undergraduate student who considered herself to be an unflinching non-believer. One of the most significant events in her life, she said, was failing an important university course and losing her prestigious scholarship. It changed everything. But when she was asked why it happened to her, an ambiguous question that appealed to her poor study habits, challenges at home, or ineptitude as much as anything else, she answered, "So that I could see that even if I failed a course, my life wouldn't actually end." This woman is indeed an atheist, in terms of how she identifies herself. And yet, like many religious believers, she sees some intrinsic meaning in her personal life events. A recent study found that atheists become emotionally aroused when asked to dare God or strike them down, suggesting that subconsciously they do believe in a higher power, even if they consciously do not admit it. In the first study, reading the provocations addressed to God increased atheist emotional arousal more than reading neutral statements about such things as sleep and weather. Second, God's statements resulted in equal tension among atheists as reading the offensive statements. For example, it's okay to kick a puppy in the face. Third, the same pattern of results was obtained for religious individuals. The results indicate that compared to their conviction and responses on the self-report measures, atheists' implicit reactions to the God statements were more similar to the reactions of religious individuals. When reading the God statements in Study 2, atheists experienced greater emotional arousal than when reading the offensive statements. Moreover, when reading the God statements, atheists' emotional arousal increased as much as did religious individuals' arousal. Atheists also refused to say aloud the God statements, and they felt the need to undo the statements equally often as religious individuals did, although neither group refused to say the statements very often or retracted statements very often. In other words, one may think that they don't believe in a God, but that doesn't necessarily connect to a true repressed belief they have, or that belief may be present in their mind even if they're consciously not aware of it. In a similar study, Pascal Boyer equally states that disbelief is generally the result of deliberate, effortful work against our natural cognitive dispositions, hardly the easiest ideology to propagate. Norenzayan and Gervais recently said that disbelief requires some hard cognitive work to reject or override the intuitions that nourish religious beliefs. Another study from 2011 shows atheists exhibit anger towards God, which is strange because you can't really be angry at things you don't think exist. I may not like the character of Zeus or Allah, but that doesn't mean I hate them. Yet studies show atheists are mad at God. But why? Perhaps their disbelief is not really disbelief, but a rejection and hatred towards someone they know exists. And disbelief is just a mental way of dealing with their anger. Again, there is so much research on this, it would be impossible to cover it all without making a video that's over an hour long. But the data shows religious people really do believe God exists, and their belief is completely normal with cognitive brain development, not a delusion or a mental trick. It is in fact atheists whose beliefs are unnatural, and the data leads to a strong possibility their beliefs are actually the ones that are delusions. So in return to the atheist who asked, do we really believe in our religion? Yes, and we have the science to back it. In fact, it appears atheism is the unnatural belief that people have to force themselves to accept. Perhaps atheists have invented their beliefs to delude themselves into thinking there is no higher power to tell them how to live. Perhaps it makes them feel comfortable to think they don't have to worry about being judged later on for their actions, and they can do whatever they please now. Whatever the reason, the irony cannot be passed up. We are told religion is a delusion created by wish fulfillment, and peer-reviewed studies suggest it is the other way around. So atheists, why are you believing a delusion? And do you really believe this odd fairy tale you've told yourselves? Now to wrap up, I want to be clear, I'm not saying this demonstrates logically that God exists. I have plenty of direct arguments for that. But this research is what we would expect if theism were true, meaning that atheism is a delusion, and we all have this natural sense that God does exist, given to us by our Creator. This also shows something very interesting. See, for years I've been debating with atheists about the overwhelming evidence for God's existence, and a lot of times the atheists will just give up and say, well, it's not enough to convince them. Well, due to the studies I cited in this video, I find that hard to believe, because according to the data, it is very natural and easy for people to accept the existence of God, and it takes hard cognitive work to believe atheism is true. So when we present the evidence that God exists, it shouldn't be too difficult for anyone to accept, unless they have an underlying emotional desire to reject God, perhaps due to anger or the desire to be their own God, whatever it may be. But the point remains, there is no good reason to reject the existence of God, especially when we have a mountain of evidence and data to support our arguments. According to the research, it requires some hard cognitive work to deny the existence of God, and there is plenty of evidence out there to support his existence anyway. So in the end, the data only leads me to wonder, who are atheists really trying to fool? Us or themselves?